Hardy Fiber Cement Siding handles conditions that can cause damage to vinyl. From fire to hail, Hardy Siding stands tall through it all, helping trade professionals look their best when they recommend Hardy Siding and Trim. See the proof at jameshardy.com.
This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We are thrilled today to be joined by Rick Kes. Rick is a partner at RSM. RSM's the leader in sort of private equity consulting in the mid-market, just a fantastic firm, a lot of QFE work and readiness for deal work. We're going to talk to Rick today about what is going on in the private equity environment, what should we expect this year, what is he seeing, and a lot more. We're talking today in a strange day in the markets where President Trump imposed tariffs yesterday on Canada, Mexico, and China. That's causing some gyration in the markets. But looking beyond that, or maybe you can't, Rick, can you tell us what we could expect in the PE deal world, currently?
Yeah, this week has been kind of another crazy week, I'd say, in terms of just things that we have our eye on, and kind of jokingly, the most exciting part to me was the Luka Doncic trade last on Saturday. That kind of shocked me for sure. But the tariffs, obviously receiving a ton of headlines, and I'd say our economists that work within RSM are a little industry agnostic and things of that nature. So, they're very in depth in their research and analysis on the impact of tariffs. And when I think of it from a industry perspective, it definitely is going to have different impacts to different industries, as one would expect. But, obviously my industry of choice tends to be healthcare. And, and I think about healthcare, obviously a lot of supplies and, goods are bought from companies that may have, acquired those goods from China or Mexico or Canada. So, we are talking to our clients a little bit about tariffs. I mean, it's not like the number one issue on many of our clients' minds, but I do think, just like anything, more uncertainty in the market is probably not good for deal-making activity, except for if you can, perhaps take the uncertainty and kind of say, well, maybe in the private market, maybe in more domestic-focused services, the tariff exposure isn't as strong, so maybe it isn't as, pervasive to the overall deal market thesis kind of consideration. So, it's hard to know for sure, but in my mind, healthcare is somewhat insulated from some of that tariff issues, although, obviously, there are plenty of things that they're buying that are ultimately, going to be potentially subject to a tariff, but it isn't like 90% of their supply chain is coming from China or something like that, and that they're going to have this outsized impact. But again, uncertainty is typically not all that well received by investors kind of in any sector. So I would think it will at least put a pause in some people's mind. Whether it keeps them from doing a deal or not is yet to be seen, but certainly not exactly accretive to the overall process, I wouldn't think.
100%. And I guess I'll mention two things just quickly. One is Chairman Powell has some concern with them just in terms of inflation. So it's going to cause him to go a little bit slow in reducing rates, it seems like. So that's one thing that can impact the deal market. The second thing, as long as we're talking healthcare a little bit, I guess one of the big concerns in the healthcare world is the potential efforts by the Trump administration, President Trump's administration, to cut some of the spending federally, and some big parts of that are towards Medicaid, Affordable Care Act subsidies, and some other places. And that could have a negative impact on the healthcare deal world, I take it.
Oh, certainly. Kind of going back to the week being exciting, I woke up to, an email from our firm related to the potential pause, the announced pause, and then later the rescinding of that pause of federal funding. And, immediately our clients started calling related to Medicaid in particular, other, government funded things like subsidies and other things like that. So yes, I do think, this past week, whether it's the tariffs or the federal funding pause or, some of the other things that have continued to be somewhat newsworthy have continued to, I'd say, shake the overall healthcare ecosystem a bit. Now, some of those things have, quickly changed or quickly subsided, but some of them still exist. And I think then now, even with the rescinding of that, federal funds, announcement, even with that, I think there is now like this heightened level of uncertainty of, well, could that happen again? Or could the overall tension there cause issues in the future? And obviously it's just probably not all that great news for many of those in the healthcare industry to cause more uncertainty than less. And I do think you're right on the inflationary perspective. Our economist put out a video yesterday about the price of guacamole. Avocados are getting kind of a lot of news related to the increase with the tariffs. You kind of extrapolate that to other goods and services purchased from Mexico, Canada, China. Obviously, that's just going to cause inflation potentially. And if that inflation comes through, the interest rate environment obviously is going to have kind of an impact as well.
No, 100%. And avocados may not be the biggest thing, but they're directional in terms of issues versus specifically about avocados and guacamole. Even though, you're in Minnesota, I'm in Chicago, we love our guacamole. We probably love it every place in the country, but we'll see how this goes. Let me ask you another question. We were talking pre-Super Bowl, Eagles versus Chiefs. Are you allowed? I know you're at a big institutional firm, one of the best in the business. Are you allowed to give a prediction on that game, Eagles versus Chiefs? And if so, do you have a prediction?
It's funny. I am allowed to make a prediction, but my children are 13, 11, and 6, and they're all asking me the same question. And I told them, I don't know whether you like Pat Mahomes or not. I just don't know how you vote against him or how you bet against him. He seems to find a way to win, whether, you believe the press and some of that is because of the refs and all that. Who knows? But I would have a hard time betting against him. But on the other end, Saquon Barkley seems to get the ball and score a lot. So I guess, you kind of have two players that really probably, depending on who has the better game, I bet whoever has the better game out of those two people, that's the team that's going to win, in my opinion. It comes down to those two individuals.
No, thank you very much. We'll see what happens. I do think there's probably enough people that have had enough of Patrick Mahomes is hard not to love. He's actually a wonderful player and a wonderful talent and seems like a great person. But it is hard to want the team to keep on winning. So we'll be cheering for the Eagles, and Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley and so forth. But, oh, my goodness, it is what it is. Never dull. Rick, thank you so much. Tariffs, cuts to Medicaid, Medicare. It's a tough Monday morning, and we'll see how it all goes. It's it could be worse, and we'll see how it all plays through. Thank you so much for joining us, Rick Kes, RSM, on the Becker Private Equity Business Podcast. We are thrilled on the podcast to have recently reached 22 million downloads between the healthcare podcast and the private equity podcast. So God bless you all for listening. Thank you very, very much.